Right now to the ENCA Money Desk now. My colleague Devin Murugan is standing by, of course, to give us an outlook on how we're looking on the economy. Good afternoon to you, Devin. I mean, 1 week into the lockdown, we definitely are seeing numbers locally, but also we're looking at these numbers globally. What difference or similarities are we seeing there?
It's very interesting to measure up how we're experiencing this virus, Tumelo, in comparison to what's happening internationally. Well, just a reminder, more than 1 million people have now been diagnosed with COVID-19 globally, as the global death toll from the virus surpasses 53,000. Now, this graph, a picture of what South Africa looks like, is by Johns Hopkins University, spelling out what the past month looked like in terms of the infection rate in South Africa. And you can see the graph towards the end losing its steepness. That's in the last few days, reflecting perhaps that the rate of infection is dropping due to the lockdown. But there's a warning from the health minister that we are still in early days. 1,462 confirmed cases. Let's bring it on to another country with the highest rate of infections. That's the United States. It's expected, the given moving dynamics of the world's biggest economy is one of the reasons why you have such a huge investment rate case, just under 250,000 cases there, and you can see that steep climb of infection is quite frightening, reflected, of course, in that steep curve there at the end. The deaths, by the way, in the United States, 6,000. And then there's the tragic story of the virus impact on Italy, the highest number of fatalities, incidentally, 4 times more than China. And that's where the virus outbreak started. You looked at the confirmed cases and you look at these deaths, not the greatest scene to watch. That curve still steep, trying to actually bend down, but Italy still having a frightening task to try and solve this problem. Not so long ago, South Korea was the second most affected country in the world. We bring up that chart now. As our health minister pointed out yesterday, it's now at number 15, and look at the deaths there, 1,174, with successful efforts to contain a runaway situation. Now, our health authorities are looking to emulate just this, with large-scale sanitizing, testing, and early lockdowns. But this is the country that the health minister says, Tumelo, we want to look at, and you see that curve at the end. It's no longer a curve. It's flattening out there in South Korea, and perhaps that's an indication of where we would want to go as the days unfold. Deaths 174, and the recovery rate's actually quite good as well. So that's the country we look to.
That's an encouraging picture. I mean, it explains that whole concept of flattening the curve, right? I mean, this is exactly what we're talking about. This is not to say people will not test positive for the coronavirus, but, you know, in as much as possible, that's spread out. Because if you look at it, on the curve there, it's still high, the number of people who've tested positive, but it's over gradually a period of time such that the health system is able to cope with demand when that demand is there.
It's precisely that. As we take a closer look at that graphic there, Tulis, what you're telling me is that if you look at the 10,000 cases and you look at it in relation to the deaths, you'll understand why flattening that curve is so important, because that gap is so big and we want to achieve that.
Break the chains of transmission, stay at home. Dev, talk to me about the rand. It is taking a beating, just like much of our economy. It's a double whammy, isn't it? The Moody's downgrade didn't help, and COVID-19, and this thing we are saying, stay at home, means that our economy is taking a beating and the rand is taking a beating.
Indeed, and you know, it's human nature not to think about an odd thing like the currency where there's all numbers around the place when we see people rushing into hospitals, but it's so important in our recovery post-COVID-19. The rand hitting a new all-time low. It's now 40% weaker to the US dollar compared to the same time last year. The local currency is one of many emerging market currencies hit by the investor panic of the COVID-19 pandemic. But domestically, as you pointed out, Tulis, the rand is also under pressure following that Moody's downgrade of South Africa to sub-investment grade. It happened late last week, Friday. A weaker rand will make imports more expensive. It will stoke inflation. What you don't want is to get out of this virus situation only to face shopping being so much more expensive. All right, the other big story, Eskom is using the reduced demand due to the national lockdown to do short-term maintenance. CEO Andre de Ruyter saying this will mitigate the risk of load shedding. The utility warned the country in January that load shedding will continue for at least 18 months. There have been no rotational power cuts since the lockdown began.
We have been able to conduct much needed short-term maintenance on double the number of units that we are normally able to do. So we've taken down double the capacity in the face of a drop in demand of about 7,500 megawatts. And this has assisted us in doing that maintenance. We think that we'll be able to emerge from this lockdown period, therefore, with a fleet in which we have a better reliability and a better predictability. Having said that, we still have to do a lot of work to catch up with 10 years of neglect that needs to be repaired.
Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter there.